Amy Rodriguez crawled through the narrow maintenance tunnel beneath level 47 of Haven Station, her toolbox scraping against the metal walls with each movement forward. The smell of recycled air and machine oil filled her nostrils as she followed. The steady drip, drip, drip that had been reported by a frustrated food vendor 3 decks above. Water leaks were serious business on a space station where every drop had to be recycled and reused. Her flashlight beam danced across pipes and conduits that had been installed by her grandfather's generation when Haven Station was first built. The Rodriguez family had been fixing things in space for over 60 years now, and Amy knew these passages better than most people knew their own homes. Her father always said that a good plumber could read the story of a place through its pipes, and Amy had learned to listen to what the metal wanted to tell her. She found the leak exactly where she expected it, at a joint where 2 different types of pipe met. The older brass fitting had finally given up after decades of thermal expansion and contraction. But as Amy positioned her light to examine the damage, something else caught her attention. A faint shimmer in the air near the leak, like heat waves, but different, colder somehow. Amy pulled out her pocket scanner, a device her father had modified years ago to detect everything from gas leaks to electrical problems. The readings made no sense. Energy signatures that shouldn't exist, quantum fluctuations in normal space. She tapped the device and tried again. Same impossible readings. Most people would have ignored it, blamed faulty equipment and focused on the paying job. But Amy's father had taught her that when something seemed wrong, it usually was wrong. He'd saved hundreds of lives over the years by trusting his instincts about systems that appeared fine on paper, but felt wrong in practice. She finished fixing the water leak first, sealing the joint with practiced efficiency. But she couldn't stop thinking about those readings. After her shift ended, she returned to level 47 with better equipment, borrowed from the station's engineering department. The readings were stronger now and spreading. Whatever was causing, the energy disturbance was growing. Amy spent the next 3 days mapping the anomaly during her off hours. She followed it through maintenance tunnels and service corridors, plotting its expansion on a handheld tablet. The pattern made her stomach twist with worry. The disturbance was following the station's main power conduits, spreading through the infrastructure like an infection. On the 4th day, she took her findings to Station Administrator Veltok, a tall insectoid being from the Kepler system who had run Haven Station for the past 15 years. His compound eyes examined her data with the kind of patient attention that had made him popular with both human workers and alien residents. "These readings are impossible," Veltok said in his translated voice, each word carefully modulated by the universal translator implanted behind his left ear. "Space-time doesn't fracture at this scale. Your equipment must be malfunctioning." Amy had expected this response, but it still frustrated her. "Sir, I've checked and double-checked with 3 different scanners. I even calibrated them against known energy sources. These readings are real." Veltok's antennae twitched, a sign that he was thinking. Amy had learned to read his species' body language during her years working on the station. He wasn't dismissing her completely, but he wasn't convinced either. "Miss Rodriguez, your family has an excellent reputation for practical problem-solving, but this is outside your area of expertise. Space-time physics requires years of advanced study to understand properly. I suggest you focus on the maintenance issues that actually need your attention." Amy left the administrator's office feeling dismissed and angry but not defeated. If the official channels wouldn't listen, she would have to find another way. She began reaching out to contacts throughout human space, using the informal network of engineers and technicians that kept civilization running behind the scenes. Her breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Lisa Park, a quantum physicist, working on Mars, had been tracking similar anomalies near the orbital shipyards. When Amy shared her data, Lisa's response came back within hours instead of the usual days. "Amy, whatever you've found is showing up in 17 different star systems. We're calling them microfractures, and they're all appearing along major, hyperspace routes. I'm sending you everything we know, but I need you to understand something important. This isn't just a local problem. These fractures are appearing everywhere humans have built hyperspace infrastructure." The data package that arrived with Lisa's message painted a terrifying picture. The microfractures were indeed spreading along hyperspace lanes, following the routes that connected Earth to its colonies and trading partners. Each fracture was tiny, smaller than an atom, but they were growing at a measurable rate. Amy spent sleepless nights studying the data, trying to understand what she was looking at. The mathematics were beyond her, but the patterns were familiar to someone who had spent years tracking system failures through complex infrastructure. This had all the hallmarks of cascade failure, the kind of problem that started small and grew until it brought down entire networks. She began her own investigation, using her access to Haven Station's systems to scan for fractures throughout the facility. What she found kept her awake for 3 straight days. The fractures weren't random. They followed specific patterns appearing at stress points in the station's structure, places where different technologies interfaced with each other. More disturbing was their behavior. The fractures seemed to be drawn to areas of high energy, growing faster near the main reactor and the hyperspace communication array. It was as if they were feeding on the very technologies that made modern civilization possible. Amy's investigation took on new urgency when she discovered fractures appearing near the station's life support systems. If the pattern continued, they would eventually reach critical systems that kept 500,000 people alive in the vacuum of space. She tried again to get Administrator Veltok's attention, but he remained skeptical of her impossible readings. Frustrated and running out of time, Amy made a decision that would change everything. She began secretly installing monitoring equipment throughout the station, using her maintenance access to place sensors in critical locations. If the official authorities wouldn't take her seriously, she would gather enough evidence to make them listen. The monitoring network took 2 weeks to install and calibrate. When Amy activated it, the results exceeded her worst fears. The microfractures weren't just following the station's infrastructure, they were actively spreading along it. Each use of hyperspace communication, each power surge through the main conduits seemed to make them grow faster. Amy realized she was looking at something that could destroy not just Haven Station, but potentially every piece of human technology in space. The fractures were following the very systems that connected human civilization across the galaxy. If they continued to grow, they could tear apart the infrastructure that supported billions of lives. She stared at her data readouts in the dim light of a maintenance bay, feeling the weight of impossible responsibility settling on her shoulders. A plumber's daughter from a working-class family had stumbled onto something that could threaten the survival of human civilization. The question now was what she could possibly do about it. Empress Zarath felt the familiar ache in her spine as she settled into the command throne aboard the dreadnought Eternal Dominion. The specialized chair was a masterwork of draconic engineering, its neural interfaces connecting directly to her damaged nervous system, allowing her to command her vast empire despite the quantum disease that had ravaged her body 5 years ago. Around her, the bridge hummed with activity as officers from a dozen different species monitored the health of an empire that spanned 12 galaxies. Holographic displays showed the status of thousands of star systems, each one a dot of light representing billions of subjects who depended on the Imperium's protection and infrastructure. The empire her ancestors had built through conquest had become something far more complex under her rule. Where once draconic fleets had imposed order through fear and overwhelming firepower, Zarath had chosen a different path. She had transformed the Imperium into a confederation of allied worlds, each contributing their unique strengths to a civilization that provided security, prosperity, and purpose to its citizens. But now that civilization was dying, and she didn't know how to save it. Admiral Corvin approached the throne, his forearms clasped behind his back in the formal posture required when addressing the Empress. His carapace bore the scars of a dozen campaigns fought in her service, and she trusted his judgment more than any other officer in the fleet. Your Imperial Majesty, the reports from the outer systems are getting worse. 3 more hyperspace gates failed catastrophically in the Vega sector yesterday. The engineers estimate we'll lose another dozen this month if the pattern continues. Zarath closed her eyes and felt the weight of those failures. Each collapsed gate meant entire star systems cut off from the galactic economy. Billions of people, isolated and vulnerable. The Imperium's strength had always come from its ability to move fleets and resources quickly across vast distances. Without the hyperspace network, her empire would fragment into isolated pockets that couldn't support each other. "What do our scientists say about the cause?" she asked, though she already knew the answer would disappoint her. Corvin's mandibles clicked in frustration. "They're still claiming it's normal wear and tear, Your Majesty. They insist that hyperspace technology has natural limits, and we've simply reached them after millennia of use. But the failure rate has increased exponentially in the past year. This doesn't match any normal degradation pattern." The Empress shifted in her throne, feeling the neural interfaces adjust to maintain connection with the ship's systems. Through those connections, she could sense the Eternal Dominion's vast power reserves, its weapon systems, its faster-than-light engines. The technology that made her empire possible was literally part of her now, and she could feel it struggling against some invisible force. "Show me the latest system reports," she commanded. The main display shifted to show a three-dimensional map of the Imperium's core territories. Red indicators marked failed systems, yellow showed those operating at reduced capacity, and green represented fully functional infrastructure. A year ago, the display had been almost entirely green. Now red dominated entire sectors. Zareth studied the pattern of failures, her enhanced mind processing the data through the throne's computational systems. There was something familiar about the distribution, something that reminded her of battlefield damage reports from her warrior days. But this wasn't the result of enemy action. This was systematic failure spreading through the Empire's most vital systems. "Your Majesty," interrupted Science Director Thale from her position at the communications station. "We're receiving priority transmissions from the Andromeda Research Institute. They're reporting similar failures in their experimental hyperspace facilities." This was new information. The Research Institute operated independently from the main empire, focusing on advanced theoretical work that often took centuries to produce practical results. If they were experiencing the same problems, it suggested the issue went beyond normal infrastructure maintenance. "Put them through," Zareth ordered. The holographic display shifted to show Director Valik, his reptilian features drawn with exhaustion and worry. Behind him, she could see the controlled chaos of a research facility operating in crisis mode. "Your Imperial Majesty, I regret to inform you that we've lost 3 more experimental gates today, but we've also discovered something that changes everything. The failures aren't random and they're not limited to our territory." Zareth leaned forward in her throne, ignoring the spike of pain from her damaged spine. "Explain." "Our long-range sensors have detected similar failure patterns throughout this galaxy and beyond. The breakdown is affecting every major spacefaring civilization we can monitor. Whatever is causing our infrastructure to fail is operating on a universal scale." The implications hit her like a physical blow. If the problem was universal, then no amount of Imperial resources could solve it through traditional means. This wasn't a threat that could be conquered or negotiated with. It was something fundamental going wrong with the technology that made interstellar civilization possible. "Director, what are your scientists' recommendations?" Valak's expression grew even more grim. "Your Majesty, our models suggest complete infrastructure collapse within 50 years at current degradation rates. The only solutions we can envision would require cooperation with other major civilizations, sharing of technologies that have been state secrets for millennia, and resource commitments that exceed the Imperium's total economic output." After the transmission ended, Zareth sat in silence for several minutes, feeling the weight of impossible decisions pressing down on her. Around her, the bridge crew continued their duties, but she could sense their underlying fear. They had all grown up believing in the Imperium's strength and permanence. The idea that their civilization might simply stop working was beyond their ability to accept. Admiral Corvin approached the throne again, his voice carefully modulated to avoid any suggestion of criticism. "Your Majesty, perhaps it's time to consider more aggressive resource acquisition. The outer territories have populations and materials we haven't fully utilized. If we need resources on an unprecedented scale..." He didn't need to finish. Zareth understood what he was suggesting. The Imperium could return to its old ways, strip mining entire systems and conscripting whole populations to throw at this problem. They had the military strength to take whatever they needed from weaker civilizations, but she had spent 30 years building something better than the conquest empire her ancestors had left her. The thought of destroying that progress, of betraying the trust of billions of subjects who had learned to see the Imperium as a protector rather than an oppressor, made her feel physically sick. "No," she said firmly. "We don't solve this crisis by becoming the very thing our subjects need protection from." "Then what do you propose, Your Majesty?" Zareth closed her eyes and accessed the throne's deep memory banks, searching through millennia of imperial history for precedents. The Draconic Imperium had faced existential threats before, but always from external enemies that could be fought and defeated. This was different. This was a problem that couldn't be solved through superior firepower or tactical brilliance. As she searched through the historical records, one fact kept emerging. Every great crisis in imperial history had been solved through the unexpected application of technologies or perspectives from other species. The hyperspace gates themselves had been perfected by combining draconic energy manipulation with navigation systems developed by the insectoid Valkyrie. The neural interface technology that kept her connected to her empire despite her disability had been created by merging draconic biotechnology with human cybernetics. The Imperium's greatest strength had never been its military power alone. It had been its ability to take the best ideas from every species under its protection and combine them into something greater than the sum of its parts. "Admiral," she said slowly, "what do you know about human engineering capabilities?" Corvin's mandibles clicked in surprise. "Humans, Your Majesty? They're excellent at maintaining existing technology, but they lack the theoretical knowledge for breakthrough innovations. Their science is centuries behind ours, but they have a reputation for solving impossible problems through unconventional methods, and according to Director Valek's report, they're experiencing the same infrastructure failures we are. They may have insights we lack." The suggestion hung in the air like an explosive charge. For the Draconic Imperium to ask for help from any other species was unprecedented. To ask for help from humans, who most imperial citizens saw as clever servants rather than equals, bordered on the unthinkable. But as Zareth looked at the display showing her dying empire, she realized that unthinkable solutions might be the only ones that could save them all. Amy stood in the abandoned research facility on asteroid station Omega-7, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air as the failing life support system struggled to maintain minimal atmosphere. The facility had been evacuated 6 months ago when funding ran out for the Quantum Physics Research Initiative, but the computers were still running on backup power, and their databanks held secrets that could change everything. Dr. Lisa Park worked beside her, connecting portable power cells to the main database servers. 2 other engineers from their hastily assembled team worked to bring the facility's sensor array back online. They had come here following the trail of microfractures that Amy had first discovered on Haven Station, and what they were finding made her earlier fears seem small and manageable. "Got it," Lisa announced as the main display screens flickered to life. "Amy, you need to see this." The research team here wasn't just studying hyperspace mechanics. They were tracking the same fractures you found, but on a scale that covers the entire known universe. The data that filled the screens painted a picture of reality itself breaking down. The microfractures weren't limited to human space or even to their local galaxy cluster. They were appearing everywhere that advanced civilizations had built hyperspace infrastructure, following the invisible web of faster-than-light technology that connected thousands of species across the cosmos. Amy studied the 3-dimensional maps showing fracture distribution patterns. Her maintenance background gave her a different perspective than the theoretical physicists who had originally compiled this data. She could see the progression of system failure spreading through the universe's technological infrastructure like rust spreading through old pipes. "Lisa, look at this timeline data," she said, pointing to a series of calculations displayed on one of the secondary screens. The fractures started appearing about 2,000 years ago, right around the time multiple species achieved large-scale hyperspace travel, but the rate of new fractures has been increasing exponentially. Lisa nodded grimly. "That matches what we've been seeing in human space. Every time someone opens a hyperspace gate or sends a faster-than-light communication, They're tearing tiny holes in the quantum foam that underlies normal space-time. For millions of years, those tears healed naturally. But we've reached a tipping point where we're creating damage faster than the universe can repair it. The implications were staggering. Every spacefaring civilization in the known universe was unknowingly contributing to the destruction of reality itself. The very technologies that had allowed species to spread across the stars were slowly unraveling the fabric of existence. Amy pulled up another set of data files, these ones labeled with warning markers indicating classified military research. What about this section? The access logs show someone was working on these files right up until the facility was evacuated. Lisa's hands flew over the control interface, unlocking files that had been sealed by the highest levels of human government security. What they revealed was even worse than Amy had feared. The research team had discovered that the fractures weren't just growing, they were beginning to interact with each other. "My God," Lisa whispered as she read through the final research reports. They calculated the cascade failure point. Once the fractures reach critical density, they'll start merging and expanding at light speed. Complete breakdown of space-time. Structure across the entire observable universe. Amy felt her stomach drop as she read the timeline projections. At current rates of expansion, critical density would be reached in less than 30 years. After that, the breakdown would be irreversible and universal. Every planet, every star, every living being in the cosmos would be torn apart as the fundamental structure of reality collapsed. "There has to be a solution," Amy said, refusing to accept that they had discovered the end of everything. These people were brilliant. They must have worked out some way to fix this. She began searching through the database more systematically, looking for research into repair methods or prevention strategies. What she found was a project labeled Universal Infrastructure Recovery Initiative that had been worked on by the facility's entire research team in their final months of operation. The solution they had developed was as ambitious as it was terrifying. Stopping the cascade failure would require a coordinated shutdown of all hyperspace technology throughout the known universe, followed by the deployment of quantum repair stations that could slowly heal the damaged space-time structure. The repair process would take at least 50 years, during which faster-than-light travel and communication would be impossible. But the resource requirements made Amy's head spin. The repair stations alone would require exotic materials that didn't exist naturally, manufactured using technologies that most civilizations kept as closely guarded secrets. The energy requirements for the repair process exceeded the total output of most star systems, and the coordination required would need every major spacefaring species to work together with a level of trust and cooperation that had never existed in galactic politics. 12 trillion credits, Lisa said quietly, reading from the economic analysis section. That's their estimate for the total cost of the repair project. 12 trillion credits worth of materials, energy, and coordinated effort from every advanced civilization in the universe. Amy stared at the number, trying to comprehend what it meant. The entire human economy, including all colonies and trading partners, had a gross product of maybe 200 billion credits per year. Even the vast, draconic Imperium, with its 12 galaxies of territory, couldn't finance a project of this scale alone. It gets worse, Lisa continued, pulling up additional files. Look at the political analysis. The project requires sharing of military-grade technologies between species that have been enemies for millennia. Humans would have to give hyperspace navigation codes to the Draconics. The Draconics would have to share their energy manipulation techniques with their rivals. Every species would have to trust their most dangerous enemies with technologies that could be used to destroy them. Amy walked to the facility's observation window and stared out at the stars, trying to process what they had discovered. Somewhere, out there, the microfractures were continuing to grow, spreading through the infrastructure that connected thousands of worlds and trillions of living beings. The countdown to universal destruction had already begun, and stopping it would require the impossible. But as she stood there, she remembered her father's words about fixing problems that seemed unsolvable. He had always said that the key wasn't to find a perfect solution, but to find any solution that worked, even if it seemed crazy to everyone else. Sometimes the wildest ideas were the only ones that could actually succeed. Lisa, What if we approach this differently? Instead of trying to convince governments and military leaders to cooperate, what if we started with the engineers and technicians, the people who actually maintain these systems? Lisa joined her at the window. You mean bypass official channels entirely? Amy, that's essentially proposing to commit treason against every major government in known space. Not treason, Amy, said, her mind racing with possibilities. Think about it. Every spacefaring civilization has people like us, engineers and maintenance workers, who keep the critical systems running. We all face the same problem, and we all have the same interest in solving it. Maybe we can build cooperation from the ground up instead of trying to impose it from the top down. She turned back to the research data, studying the distribution maps with new eyes. The fractures were following technological infrastructure, which meant they were showing up in places where maintenance workers like herself would be the first to notice them. If she could reach out to those workers, share what she had learned, maybe she could build a network of people who understood the problem and were willing to work together to solve it. There's something else, Amy said as a new idea began to form. The research shows that the fractures are attracted to areas of high energy use, especially anything involving hyperspace technology. But what if that's also their weakness? What if we could use that attraction to control where they appear and how they grow? Lisa's eyes widened as she understood the implications. You're thinking about creating controlled fractures, ones we can monitor and repair systematically instead of dealing with random breakdowns across the universe. Exactly. But to do that, we'd need cooperation from civilizations that have the most advanced hyperspace technology. We'd need the Draconic Imperium. The idea was audacious beyond anything Amy had ever considered. Making contact with the Draconics would be illegal under human law, potentially an act of war. But if the alternative was the end of everything, maybe illegal actions were not just justified but necessary. Amy made her decision with the same practical certainty that had guided her through years of maintenance work. When a system was failing catastrophically, you did whatever it took to fix it regardless of rules or protocols or political considerations. The universe itself was the system now, and she was going to fix it, even if it meant risking everything she had ever cared about. Lisa, help me compile all this data into a message that non-specialists can understand. I'm going to contact the Draconic Imperium directly. Amy floated in the docking bay of the neutral station Crossroads, her stomach churning with a mixture of fear and determination as she waited for the most important meeting in galactic history. The station existed in the void between the Milky Way and Andromeda galaxies, built centuries ago as a trading post for species that couldn't safely enter each other's territory. Now it would host a conversation that could either save the universe or start the largest war in cosmic history. The past 3 weeks had been chaos since she transmitted her message to the Draconic Imperium. Human authorities had branded her a traitor and issued arrest warrants that forced her to flee Haven Station in the middle of the night. Half the human fleet was hunting for her, while the other half was preparing for possible draconic invasion. The media painted her as everything from a heroic whistleblower to a dangerous terrorist who had potentially doomed humanity. But somehow, impossibly, Empress Zarath had agreed to meet. The massive draconic transport ship Crimson Dawn docked with Crossroads Station with mechanical precision that spoke of centuries of engineering excellence. Amy watched through the observation port as boarding tubes connected and atmospheric pressure equalized. In a few minutes, she would be face to face with the most powerful being in known space, trying to convince her that a human maintenance worker had discovered the solution to a universal crisis. Amy had spent days preparing for this meeting, studying everything she could find about draconic culture and the Empress herself. What she learned painted a picture of a ruler who had transformed conquest into cooperation, turning a war-driven empire into something resembling a galactic commonwealth. But she had also learned about the quantum disease that confined Zarath to her specialized throne, and about the growing infrastructure failures that threatened everything the Empress had built. The airlock opened with a soft hiss, and Amy got her first glimpse of Imperial power. 6 draconic guards in ceremonial armor entered first, their scaled forms moving with predatory grace as they secured the meeting chamber. Behind them came technicians pushing anti-grav units loaded with equipment Amy couldn't identify. Finally, the Empress herself appeared, Zarath's command throne was a marvel of integrated technology, its sleek surfaces covered with neural interfaces that connected directly to the Empress's spine and skull. Despite her physical limitations, she radiated an aura of absolute authority that made Amy understand how this being had held together an empire spanning multiple galaxies. Her golden eyes fixed on Amy with an intensity that felt like being examined by a force of nature. The first hour of their meeting was a disaster. Every word Amy spoke seemed to emphasize the gulf between them. When she tried to explain the technical details of the quantum fractures, Zarath questioned her qualifications. When she outlined the scope of the crisis, the Empress demanded to know why a human had discovered something that draconic scientists had missed. When Amy proposed cooperation between their species, Zarath's guards shifted nervously at what they clearly saw as presumption from an inferior being. Amy felt her carefully prepared presentation falling apart, but she pressed on with the stubborn determination that had carried her through years of solving impossible maintenance problems. She pulled up holographic displays showing the fracture patterns, walking the Empress through the data point by point. "Your Imperial Majesty, I know this sounds impossible, but look at the correlation between fracture density and hyperspace gate usage in your territory. The pattern is identical to what we're seeing in human space." Zarath studied the data through her throne's neural interfaces, her enhanced processing power analyzing Amy's findings in seconds. "These correlations could be coincidental. Your sample size is limited and your methodology lacks the rigor of proper scientific investigation." But Amy caught something in the Empress's tone that gave her hope. Zarath wasn't dismissing the two data outright. She was testing it, challenging it the way any good engineer would challenge a proposed solution to a critical system failure. Amy took a deep breath and made the decision to abandon diplomatic protocol entirely. "Your Majesty, forget about my qualifications for a minute. Forget about human versus draconic science. Look at this data as if you were troubleshooting a system failure in your own empire. What does your experience tell you?" The change in Zarath's demeanor was subtle, but unmistakable. For the first time since the meeting began, she was looking at Amy as a fellow problem solver, instead of a potential threat or inferior supplicant. "The pattern suggests cascade failure propagating through interconnected systems," Zarath said, slowly. "If your data is accurate, then every use of hyperspace technology is accelerating the breakdown, but that would mean that every civilization in the universe is unknowingly contributing to its own destruction," Amy finished. "And the only way to stop it is for all of us to work together, sharing technologies and resources on a scale that's never been attempted." Zarath was quiet for several minutes, her neural interfaces processing calculations that Amy couldn't follow. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone making a decision that would affect trillions of lives. "Show me the abandoned research facilities data, all of it." Amy transmitted the complete database from Omega-7, watching as the Empress absorbed months of research in minutes. She saw Zarath's expression change as she encountered the same projections that had convinced Amy to risk everything. The timeline to universal collapse, the resource requirements for repair, the political impossibilities that made the solution seem worse than the problem. 12 trillion credits, Zarath said finally, and cooperation between species that have been enemies since before either of us was born. "Miss Rodriguez, you're asking me to commit the Imperium to the largest and most expensive project in galactic history, based on research conducted by a species my people consider technologically primitive." Amy felt her last hope beginning to slip away, but then Zarath continued. "However, your data correlates with infrastructure failures we've been experiencing throughout the Imperium. My scientists have been unable to explain the cascade pattern, but your quantum fracture theory provides a framework that makes sense of our observations." The Empress paused, and Amy could see her weighing alternatives that all led to disaster. "There's something else you need to understand," Zarath said. "The quantum disease that confines me to this throne was caused by exposure to unstable hyperspace fields during a military campaign 15 years ago. My doctors never understood what caused the neural degeneration, but your fracture theory suggests it might be related to space-time damage from excessive hyperspace use." Amy felt a chill as she understood the implications. Your Majesty, if hyperspace exposure can cause quantum disease, then everyone who works with these technologies is at risk. Ship crews, communication technicians, anyone who spends time near active hyperspace equipment. Exactly. Which means this crisis isn't just about infrastructure failure. It's about the health and survival of every being who depends on faster-than-light technology. Zareth's golden eyes fixed on Amy with new intensity. Miss Rodriguez, I'm prepared to commit the full resources of the Draconic Imperium to your repair project, but I need something from you in return. Amy's heart raced with sudden hope mixed with apprehension. What do you need? I need you to coordinate the technical aspects of the project, not as a human representative, but as the person who discovered the problem and understands it better than anyone else. The political challenges of getting multiple species to cooperate are enormous, but the technical challenges are even worse. We need someone who can think outside traditional frameworks and find solutions that no one else would consider. The offer was everything Amy had hoped for, and everything she had feared. Accepting meant abandoning any hope of returning to her old life, taking responsibility for a project that could fail spectacularly and doom the universe in the process. But refusing meant watching reality itself collapse while knowing she might have prevented it. Amy thought about her father's lessons about fixing impossible problems, about taking responsibility for systems that other people depended on. She thought about the trillions of beings across the universe who had no idea their existence was threatened by the very technologies that connected them to each other. I accept, she said, sealing both their fates with two simple words that would change the course of universal history. Amy stood in the command center of Station Unity, the massive structure that had been built in just 18 months to coordinate the largest engineering project in galactic history. Through the observation windows, she could see construction, ships from hundreds of different species working together to complete the first quantum repair station, a device that would either save the universe or prove that some problems were truly impossible to solve. The past 2 years had transformed both her life and the political landscape of known space. What had started as a desperate alliance between humanity and the Draconic Imperium had grown into the Universal Engineering Coalition, representing over 3,000 species united by the shared threat of reality collapse. The technical challenges had been staggering, but the political ones had nearly destroyed the project dozens of times. Amy walked past status displays showing the coordination of efforts across multiple galaxies. Engineers from species that had been at war for centuries now worked side by side, sharing technologies that had been state secrets for millennia. The insectoid Velkari had provided navigation systems. The crystalline Zephyrians had contributed their expertise in quantum field manipulation. Even the mysterious gas cloud entities from the Magellanic Clouds had offered their unique understanding of space-time physics. But the real breakthrough had come from an unexpected source. Empress Zareth had not only committed the Imperium's vast resources to the project, she had undergone a transformation that amazed everyone who knew her history. The conqueror who had once ruled through fear and overwhelming force had become the coalition's most effective diplomat, using her authority and reputation to convince reluctant species to join the effort. Amy found Zareth in the command center's communication hub, her throne surrounded by holographic displays showing the status of repair stations throughout the local galaxy cluster. The Empress looked exhausted, her golden scales dulled by months of constant stress, but her eyes still held the fierce determination that had built an empire. The Andorian Republic just confirmed their participation, Zareth reported as Amy approached. That brings us to full coverage for the local galactic group, but I'm still concerned about the timing. If even one major civilization pulls out during the shutdown phase, the entire project could collapse. Amy nodded, understanding the delicate balance they had achieved. The repair process required a coordinated shutdown of all hyperspace technology across the observable universe, followed by the careful activation of quantum repair stations that would slowly heal the damaged space-time structure. The mathematics were precise and unforgiving. Too few repair stations, and the fractures would continue to grow. Too many, and they would interfere with each other catastrophically. How are we doing on the resource requirements? Amy asked. though she already knew the answer would be close to the theoretical minimum. "We're at 97% of the calculated need," Zareth replied. "The crystalline confederacy came through with the last of the exotic matter we needed for the field generators. But Amy, there's something else. The long-range sensors are showing that fracture growth has accelerated again. We may have less time than we originally calculated." Amy felt the familiar weight of impossible deadlines that had driven the entire project. Every month of delay meant more fractures, bringing them closer to the cascade failure point where repair would become impossible. They had been racing against the fundamental breakdown of reality itself, and now it seemed they were losing that race. "How much less time?" she asked, though she dreaded the answer. 18 months, maybe less. "We have to begin the shutdown sequence within the year, ready or not." Amy walked to the central display showing the status of repair stations across the universe. Green indicators marked completed installations. Yellow showed stations under construction, and red indicated sites where political or technical problems had delayed progress. There were still too many red indicators for comfort, but the pattern was better than she had dared hope when the project began. The real miracle wasn't the technology they had developed, impressive as it was. The miracle was that thousands of species had chosen to work together instead of fighting over the remaining stable resources as their universe collapsed around them. Amy had seen former enemies sharing critical supplies, rival civilizations pooling their greatest scientific minds, and proud species admitting they needed help from others they had once considered inferior. Empress Zareth had been the key to making that cooperation possible. Her transformation from conqueror to protector had inspired similar changes throughout the coalition. Species that had spent millennia building walls between each other had learned to see their differences as strengths that made the whole greater than its parts. "Amy, I need to tell you something," Zareth said, her voice carrying a weight that made Amy look up from the displays. "The quantum disease that put me in this throne has been progressing despite our best medical efforts. My doctors estimate I have perhaps 6 months before complete neural shutdown." Amy felt the world shift around her as she processed what the Empress was saying. Zareth had become more than an ally over the past 2 years. She had become a friend, one of the few people who understood the burden of responsibility they both carried. "There must be something we can do, some treatment." "Perhaps," Zareth said with a sad smile. "But that's not what matters now. What matters is that this project succeeds, with or without me. I've designated Admiral Corvin as my successor, and he's fully committed to seeing the repair process through to completion." Amy struggled to find words adequate to the moment, but Zareth continued before she could respond. "I want you to know that working with you has changed everything I believed about leadership and cooperation. My ancestors built the Imperium through conquest, taking what they needed and imposing their will on others. But you showed me that real strength comes from bringing out the best in others, from building something together that none of us could create alone." The communication hub suddenly filled with alert signals as sensors across the galaxy cluster detected something unprecedented. Amy and Zareth turned to the displays, watching as data streams showed quantum fractures beginning to merge in the Perseus Arm region. "It's starting," Amy whispered, "the cascade failure." But even as she spoke, other displays lit up with green indicators. Repair stations throughout the affected region were coming online automatically, their quantum field generators creating zones of stable spacetime that contained the spreading fractures. The cascade effect slowed, stopped, and began to reverse as damaged spacetime healed under the influence of technologies that hadn't existed 3 years ago. "We did it," Zareth said, her voice filled with wonder. "The system is working." Amy watched the displays with growing amazement as the pattern repeated across multiple regions. Every time fractures began to merge and spread, the repair stations activated to contain and heal the damage. The universe was fighting back against its own breakdown, using technologies and coordination that had seemed impossible when she first discovered those tiny fractures on Haven Station. Over the following months, Amy watched as the project that had consumed her life reached completion. The final shutdown of hyperspace technology proceeded smoothly, with backup communication systems maintaining coordination between species across impossible distances. The quantum repair process began healing damage that had accumulated over millennia, slowly restoring stability to the fundamental structure of spacetime. Empress Zarath lived to see the first regions declared fully repaired, their spacetime structure restored to pre-fracture stability. She died peacefully in her command throne, surrounded by representatives from dozens of species who had come to pay their respects to the conqueror, who had learned to build instead of destroy. Amy stood at the observation deck of Station Unity, 5 years after the project began, watching ships from across the universe testing the new quantum-safe hyperspace gates that had been developed as part of the repair process. These new gates worked with the natural structure of spacetime instead of forcing tears through it, providing faster-than-light travel that actually strengthened reality instead of damaging it. The Universal Engineering Coalition had become a permanent institution with Amy as its director and representatives from every major spacefaring civilization working together to maintain the technologies that kept the universe stable. What had started as a desperate alliance to prevent universal collapse had grown into something unprecedented, a truly cooperative galactic civilization based on mutual aid and shared responsibility. Amy thought about her father's lessons as she watched construction crews installing the latest generation of repair stations. He had taught her that every system, no matter how complex, could be understood and fixed if you were willing to look at it from the right perspective. The universe itself had turned out to be just another system, one that required maintenance and care like any other. But the most important lesson had come from Empress Zarath. Real strength didn't come from being able to solve problems alone. It came from building the relationships and trust that let everyone work together to solve problems that no one could handle by themselves. The plumber's daughter had saved the universe not through superior technology or brilliant insight, but by doing what humans had always done best, bringing people together and convincing them that impossible problems were just problems that nobody had solved yet. And in doing so, she had changed not just the fate of reality itself, but the very definition of what it meant to be civilized.